How's it going, guys? Thank you for watching this video. It's gonna be a lot more coming. Hopefully I can get stuff out pretty quick. I'm trying to do one video a day, but as you can imagine, that can be kind of a challenge when you have other stuff to do. But this video is gonna be on how to study scripture. This is gonna be a reference guide, an outline of how I study scripture, right? And you don't have to follow my way of studying scripture, right? We all learn different ways. This is how I learn, and I think if you take my principles, if you take my advice on questions you should ask when studying scripture, and things of that sort, I think it could be very helpful to a person, especially if you're just starting out and you have no idea what's in the Old Testament, what's in the New Testament, why it's called the Old New Testament. Certain passages that you understand for the beginning Christian, right? The beginner Christian, the Christian who doesn't know anything about scripture and wants some tips on how to study scripture. So let's just jump right into it. To start off on how to study scripture, you must become a good question thinker, right? Learn basic questions to get a good context of the passage, right? So what are some basic questions you should be asking yourself? And we're going to dive into these a little bit deeper, but these are the basic questions that I think you should be asking whenever you are reading a scripture and you want to get into an in-depth study. These are the questions that you should be asking. Who, where, what, when, questions, pop-outs, and references, right? Just reading those direct questions, you probably have some questions about the questions. So let's dive into it a little bit deeper, right? So first we're going to start off with who. And when asking who, you're asking who is in the passage I'm studying, right? It's important because obviously you need to know who is in the passage, right? I mean, you can, for example, if you read Matthew 11, you can see that Jesus is talking about John and John's disciples, the crowd, and so on and so forth. So it's important to get a firm foundation of just who is in the passage, right? Now, the next question you're asking is where. Where is this passage taking place? When you know where something is taking place, it gives you the context of importance of the passage, right? So is Jesus on the boat? Is he in the middle of Galilee, right? And you can dive in a little deeper and see geologically where he is. You can look at ancient maps of where Jesus went to, if it's important to the passage. Look at how far he had to travel, things of that sort. So that's where the question where comes in. The next question I want you to ask is what? What is happening in this passage, right? So after you get through who and where, I like to ask what is happening in this passage, right? And usually how I do that is I go through the passage I'm studying and I summarize section by section, right? What is going on? This gives you a well-rounded view of the whole passage in your own words, right? And that's important, right? Because you want to be able to summarize this passage accurately. And for me, writing down, right, a small summary of each section of the passage, right? Because usually I study chapter by chapter. And so if I summarize the passage, right, section by section, it gives me a better, well-rounded, the whole passage in my own words, right? So after that, the next question I'm going to ask is when. When was this taking place, right? You might ask when specifically, what time of day, right, or night, or depending on the passage, you might need to know when in time this passage was taking place. So asking when this passage took place can add some detail, right, into your knowledge of the passage, right? Is Jesus talking about something at night? Is it during the day? You can also get into what's the time period of Jesus's ministry, right? Is it at the beginning of his ministry, in the middle? Is it towards the end of the ministry, right? Things of that sort. So that's when. The next thing that I do, right, is I ask questions, right? That's the next question is questions. Sorry, I don't mean to confuse you. But the next thing I do is this is where you can get more honest with the text, right? Ask things that you don't understand. Why Paul said this, or why did Jesus do this? And I think this section of the Bible study is important because you decide how deep you want to go into your study. You can ask hard questions and find answers for, questions that you've had for a long time about a specific passage. You can just this is where you're more honest, right, with the scripture, because right, sometimes we can read a passage and we don't understand something, but we just kind of look over it because we don't understand it, right? And this just gives you an opportunity, like I said, to be honest with the passage. So after you ask the questions, what I like to do is pop out, right? So after asking questions, it's good to jot down what pops out to you, right? What surprises you. Write down key words, key sentences in the passage, right? So it's important to look at what pops out to you, right? And then after you look at what pops out to you, usually I like to go into my notes on my phone and look at the references, right? Take note of the references, of the important references that either Paul is referencing from the Old Testament or from the Gospel, or find out if there's any very important references, right? An example of how it can shine more light on a passage is, in Hebrews, when it's talking about when the Father's saying to the Son, you laid the foundations of the earth, and so on and so forth. He's quoting Psalm 102, right? And if you're not familiar with Psalm 102 is about Yahweh. It's about God himself. So if you read Hebrews 1 and you're studying Hebrews 1 and you see that the Father is referencing Jesus as Yahweh, right? That gives you a deeper understanding of Jesus's deity, right? That even the Father is calling Jesus God, right? And so that's where references can be very important. It can give you a much in-depth understanding of the passage. So after you've asked questions and looked at the references and you saw when this happened and things of that nature, what now, right? I mean, now after you have a good grasp of the context, you can enter phase 2. If you're studying a whole chapter, it's a good idea to read the chapter before and after, right? So you can get a better context of what this passage is actually talking about. You can ask yourself, is there any parallel passages, right? I mean, if you're reading Mark, Luke, or Matthew, you can see what the author of Matthew is saying, right? You can see if he's leaving out any details. You can see if he adds any more details. Comparing it to Mark and Luke, right? You can get a better understanding of the passage if you read the parallel from, those 3 parallel gospels. Finally, this is where, you can kind of step back a little bit and and just kind of think, right? You can finally, after all you do, all these things, you can apply it to your own life, right? Ask yourself, how can I take this ancient text written to a certain people and apply it to my own life, how God intended for me to apply it, right? So now you have the context, you have, you answer all these questions that you had about the text, if you had any hard questions, right? You know who is in it. You've read the chapters before and after. Maybe you've even read the whole book if you needed to, the whole book of whatever you're studying. And now you can finally apply this chapter to your life, right? And after all this work, right, you've applied it to your life. You've asked all these questions. You should be able to give a good summary of the passage. You should be able to understand the context of the passage, right? If you're talking with LDS member or with a Jehovah Witness member, you can, and you're talking about a certain passage that you've studied, that you went through all these steps, right? You can give that LDS member or that Jehovah Witness member a good context of what is actually happening in this passage, right? If they ask you something technical, you can give them a good context to support your reasoning for that particular passage, right? And so these questions, right? These questions, just to finish up this video, I just want to finish with this, right? I just want to let you know that these questions are a starting point, right? Pretty soon you can just subconsciously ask yourself these questions and be able to look for the answers, right? You'll be able to have better resources after doing this over and over and over again, right? And the goal is to understand scripture and understand it on a deeper level. After you do this over and over and over again, right, you become a better thinker. You learn how to read scripture and how to think through scripture and understand what's actually going on in the passage. I hope you like this video, and hopefully pretty soon I'm gonna have another video about different tools that you can use to study scripture. Now we've looked at why you should study scripture, how you can study scripture. Now we're going to look at the tools so you can have a deeper understanding of these things and how to look at where things took place. We'll get into some commentaries. We'll look at atlases and things of that sort. And we'll just take it step by step. And thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe. Please follow me on Facebook. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. Like this video. Please leave a comment. Tell me how you study scripture and give each other tips on how to study scripture. So thank you guys again for subscribing and liking the video, and have a blessed day.